Go to E3, please. I'll turn it over to Mr. Beasley.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report outlines the cost of repairs deemed essential in order to continue to expend the lifespan of 2880 and 2820 15th Avenue, home to the Community Arts Council and Studio 2880. At over 80 years old, pretty much the oldest buildings in the city that the Prince George City owns, these buildings are starting to get towards the end of their lifespan. City staff have done a good job with regular and proactive maintenance and repairs over the years, but the building needs are kind of starting to overtake our ability to continue to maintain them within our current resources. So therefore, the proposed cost of repairs in this report outline what we very strongly consider to be the needs as opposed to the wants required to address in these buildings in order to extend the life of these buildings as long as we possibly can. The Civic Core planning process will, of course, include considerations and conversations for the future needs of the Community Arts Council, including accommodations. But in the meantime, we are seeking Council approval to extend the life of these buildings as long as feasible with this request. Dale Martins and myself are available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Councillor Everett.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. And here's the tough question, Mr. Beasley. Do we have any estimate or guesstimate of what that lifespan will get extended with this amount of money? And I understand it's just for the basic needs to keep it going.
The best answer I can give you is a number of years to the best of our guesses, but Mr. Martins is the manager of maintenance. Maybe you can give a guess as to how far in the future these repairs would go?
I'd estimate it at 5 to 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I think it's important that we're able to continue to use the facility.
Thank you. Councillor Skaken.
Oh, geez, thank you, Worship. I thought there's more in the queue. You talked about the Civic Core Plan, Mr. Beasley, and now we know we got about 5 years roughly. Just the funding source, is that the federal government? I can't recall what the funding source is.
Administration is proposing that the funding source be the Community Works Fund, which is it's a senior government funded program, and that money is meant actually for municipalities to be able to manage their infrastructure with. So this is the intended use of the fund. It does have a caveat that we can't use our own city staff and our own city equipment to fund the job. It has to be done by contracted services. So Mr. Beasley has assured me that that's how the work will be performed. So this is the recommended source for you.
Great. So that, to Mr. Dallier, that's not going to affect the tax rate at all. It's
No, sir. This is grant funding, and that's falls outside of our tax levy sort of constraints.
Great, and thanks. I took a tour through that building, Your Worship, a couple of weeks ago, and boy, does it need some work. Everything from the bathrooms, the toilets, the roofing, and that. And I think maybe to administration and yourself, Your Worship, there's sort of a short-term plan to fix it if we do, and try and get them involved with the Civic Core Plan. But I'm wondering if we need more direction to actually find out what's going to happen with that particular organization and where they're going to go. I don't know.
Yeah, and obviously we can't get into that this evening, but I think what we need is for staff to connect with the organization and find out their long-term plan. As we all know, there was a plan at one point to go into the old Bank of Montreal building on 3rd, so that I think that staff can resume that conversation and just find out. I will say that there's a great deal of interest in that property. Obviously, you see just behind it where Elizabeth Fry just recently opened their 55 units. And I think at some point, like a couple of other locations in our downtown core, we're going to have to make a decision on life. We're on life support on a couple of our buildings, and this certainly is needing some support.
So, Your Worship, is a motion not needed then? Administration's just going to carry on?
I don't think so, Mr. Babbage. There's been ongoing conversation, probably not for a while, but it's your call. If you'd like a resolution, we can go there.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I don't believe that would be necessary. As indicated by staff, we're about to embark on the Civic Core Plan this fall, and these user groups and others will be consulted and involved directly with that process, and we report back to Council, Your Worship.
Thank you. And the Community Arts Council at Studio 2880, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I mean, incredible asset in the community, and we just have to keep them safe and sound for now and then look at something for definitely long-term. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Frizzell, followed by Councillor Ramsey.
Thank you, Mayor Hall, and thank you to Councillor Skaken for bringing that question up of where the funding is coming from, exactly what I wanted to learn as well. just wanted to recognize Mr. Klassner's in the gallery tonight from Studio 2880, and the variety of different services that come out of those buildings is pretty significant. So glad to hear the direction we're going on this, and I'll be supportive. Thanks.
Good, thank you very much. Councillor Ramsey, followed by Kraus.
Thanks, Your Worship. And I just have a couple questions regarding the lease with the building. So is this under a non-for-profit lease with the city?
Your Worship, I don't have those details with me this evening, but I'm happy to look into it and report back.
I feel like there's some information missing here in that when we look at city-owned buildings that are being used by nonprofit organizations, usually there's a lease in place that dictates who's responsible for what elements of the building and repair. I sat on the Two Rivers Art Gallery board for years. I'm no longer on that board, and it was very clear that the organization is responsible for everything inside the building, and the city is responsible for the envelope. So when I'm reading through the report and there's a mix of the envelope and internal things, I just question what is in the lease agreement that the city is required to cover and what is the tenant supposed to cover. So I feel like there's some information missing.
Mr. Babich.
Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, that's generally correct. The typical not-for-profit lease agreement would contain those provisions that make the city responsible for the more structural components of the building. But I'm wondering if Mr. Beasley has any specific information that can be offered this evening for council, perhaps through Mr. Martins as well.
With apologies, I did not bring the agreement with me today, but just to be clear, the repairs that we're looking at are very much to do with envelope and structural piping underground, the types of things that would be deemed the landlord needs to take care of. There aren't any wants in here from the Community Art Council in terms of their furnitures or fixtures or things that they would like to have inside. They are indeed responsible for that, but we can certainly bring the lease to council if you would like to see it for sure.
Yeah, I value the Studio 2880 and the building and the facility that and the work that the Community Arts Council does. But when we're looking at us as a landlord and a provider, we have many other contracts with nonprofit organizations, and so I want to be very careful here in that we're not opening the door for other organizations to come forward and say, well, you did it for the Community Arts Council, so can you do it for us too? So I just want to be sure that we're really following what's in the lease agreement. So if there's a way to get more information to make sure that this pool of funds is what the city is responsible for in the lease, I just don't know that I can vote on this tonight without that information.
Mr. Martin.
All the items on the list we're asking money for are our responsibility, the city's responsibility. I can assure you that.
Okay, thank you. That makes me more comfortable.
Thank you. Councillor Kraus, followed by Councillor Scott.
Well, thank you, Worship. As has been already acknowledged by many, the Community Arts Council is a very important organization in our community. They need a home, and I haven't been in the building for a couple of years now, probably primarily because of COVID, but I was in the building frequently in the past, both buildings, and they needed repair then. And so I think that it's overdue. And I think I'm certainly be supporting it when the motion's made. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I'm with Councillor Ramsey, well, even more so than what she said. I'm struggling with this one. As much as I absolutely value Studio 2880 and the 2850 Avenue project or buildings, I've worked in both of them, and I wouldn't willingly work in either one of those buildings again. And it has nothing to do with the organizations that are in them because they're absolutely amazing. I'm concerned that that's over $250,000 of money that would be better placed. And so I'm really struggling with this one in relation to the financial plan. And I don't know what more I could get from this meeting that would help me in this vote. I'm going to keep listening. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what Mr. Martin just explained is that the want or the need list is needs that are fall under our responsibility. as the landlord. I think we all understand the age of the building. We understand what it needs. It's no different than our own homes. And I think at the end of the day, the decision will be left to each one of us as to how we want to deal with this, because I think what we're seeing, and I'll be to you in just a moment, Councillor Scott, what we're seeing is not only this building, but we see it with the Coliseum. We see it with other older buildings as well. So, Councillor Scott.
I totally agree, and thank you for letting me back in. I apologize to the others. I just believe that we have been having this conversation in some fashion for a long time, and I'd like a better sense that this is a step forward, even though it's a temporary measure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Sampson, followed by Ramsey.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and big thanks to Councillor Scott. I couldn't agree more. I'm glad it was said. I'm struggling with this because I think, hands down, Studio 2880, the Community Arts Council, provide an incredible service to our community. But I've been on council for over 3.5 years now, and where's the action? I mean, we can't. How many old facilities can we list off that we're hearing are out there in their life, but we have no plan in place? Where's the plan? Where's the plan for the last 20 years for any of these buildings? The reinvestment plan. We're going to open the new pool soon, and I expect the next council to be immediately developing a reinvestment plan to that facility for when it's at its end of life, so we're not scrambling again, just like we are with every other facility. But this has been, 5, 10, 20 years of I think, a lack of planning from us, and that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow. It's not that I don't think that the Community Arts Council is not worth a $260,000 investment, especially from a fund that doesn't impact the tax levy. It's that, is this building worth a $260,000 investment when we know we're going to kick it to the side as soon as we come up with a better plan? Why haven't we come up with that better plan yet? We've been talking about it for a long time. So I'm really not sold on this. Again, I want to reiterate, it's not due to a lack of support for the organization. They're incredible. They deserve a better space. It's because we can't throw money at issues that we haven't, that we've decided to ignore. That's not the solution. We need to come up with a plan. So I'm not, I'm struggling with this one significantly because I think it's money that could be better spent on a facility that has long-term benefits for this organization and not just another quick Band-Aid when it's just due to a lack of planning. So I'd like to see more before jumping up and putting my hand up for this sum of money.
Let me go to Mr. Babich, and I'm only going to talk about this one specific. Before I go to Mr. Babich, I want to talk about this specific project. There was a plan, and I will be the first one to say that it's not because of lack of planning. There was a plan in place with this organization to take over the Bank of Montreal building. That was a solid plan. And that plan has been in place for about 4 years. But due to the lack of funding from the federal government through a grant process, they weren't in a position to make that move. So that plan was solid. And I think what's happened is that, as I said, grant dollars weren't made available. That was part of what the organization was wanting to do to enhance that location, to be able to move what we see at 2880 into that particular building. Again, we could talk for a very long time about our other facilities, but tonight, specifically this one is on the agenda. So that's going to still is a real want of mine. I had made it perfectly clear to Studio 2880 that if we could make that deal work, the quicker the better, that they get into the Bank of Montreal building, and it hasn't worked out. So I think that's what we need with the conversation that I alluded to earlier between staff and the organization. So, Mr. Babich, and I'll go to Councillor Ramsey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very little to add to what you just stated. That, in fact, was the plan as you described. But I would just like to remind Council that we do have the asset management program in place that does track the condition of the facilities. And so this building has been identified as needing some work. As you indicated, we thought we had a long-term plan, and obviously that didn't play out the way that we had envisioned. So this is administration's recommendation to bridge this building long enough to allow the user group to continue operating and provide the services and the activities that are so valued in our community, while we move forward then with the alternative plan, which is the core service plan, and plan out hopefully another strategy to provide a more permanent solution, Your Worship. But as indicated by staff, this hopefully will give us those 5 to 10 years in the interim, and that's staff's recommendation.
Your Worship, if I can then, do we have, I know the Civic Core plan is coming in the fall, it kicks it down further down the road, but would this $260,000 provide what's necessary to move them into the BMO building and give them a new home that we're not investing money into a building that we're going to tear down in 3 years? That's my concern. We're putting money into a building that we're going to tear down, and that's a lot of money. I'd rather see them move to a new facility and us give them money to do that instead and get them in a more stable home that isn't, we're putting money into something that we're going to tear down. And that's where my struggle is. And we're not tearing it down in 20 years, we're tearing it down in the next few years. There's no doubt about it. This Civic Core plan is not going to come back and say, we're keeping them at 2880 15th Avenue. This core plan is going to say something else besides that. What it says, we're not sure, but it's just a lot of money. So I guess, are there options? Are there other options available, including putting money towards helping them go to a new home in the immediate future while we then discover a long-term plan?
Well, I would say that the move to the Bank of Montreal building at $260,000 is probably short by a quarter, but probably $2 million. That was, I think, the original conversation. It was somewhere around, Mr. Babbage, correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around $2 to $3 million was the granting opportunity or the granting?
I believe it's around $3 million. I may need some help from Mr. Dalio. Is probably greater than $3 million.
Yeah, that's my recollection too. Between $3 and $4 million was the grant application.
Yeah. That's for wants, not needs. So I guess I just don't have all the information to make that decision, because that's for a state-of-the-art, beautiful arts facility. What we're talking about is for lack of a better word, a hole. That's what they're in right now. They're not in a nice facility. We're going to do a Band-Aid fix, make it barely habitable, and they're still not going to be in a great facility. So, does the 260 get them in a facility that's better, not perfect, but puts them in a better position as we go into the Civic Core plan? And again, this is not with consultation with the organization yet, so I'm putting ideas out there, but I guess my concern is that's a lot of money for something that we're going to tear down and that we're still not putting them in a nice facility in the immediate future. So I'm not saying I'm completely opposed, but what I'm saying is this seems like a significant investment without looking at every option first. So that's where I'm at. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Ramsey, followed by Crouse.
Thanks, Your Worship. Do we know when Studio 2880 is expected to move into the new, or the Community Arts Council is expected to move into the new facility? Do we have that information?
We're in a bit of an interesting spot here tonight. We're trying to, we have the executive director of the location here with us, and I don't know that conversation has taken place, Councillor Ramsey, for quite some time, and I think that's why it's resurrected itself over the last little while with the need for this $260,000 investment to get them through to what Mr. Martin and Mr. Beasley is saying, 5 to 10 years. And I think through the Civic Core plan, as Mr. Babbage has laid out, that there's an opportunity to talk to the organization. Okay, what's your next step, and is it specific to the Bank of Montreal building?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I'm on the same page as Councillor Sampson, in that I just don't think that the building has 5 to 10 years left in it. I don't know that this $260,000 is going to hold it over that long, because I feel that as soon as we start looking into abatement issues and hazardous materials, that the price tag on this is going to go up, up, up. So I do have concerns regarding what that $260,000 is going to become $500,000. And, I would much rather provide support to get them into their permanent home rather than invest money in a building that is at the end of its life. So that's where I am at. Is there any way that we could table the vote on this tonight to get more information on what is the basic amount of money that we could get them into the new building?
Well, we've got the recommendation in front of us. If a recommendation comes on the floor to table it, then we'll deal with it at that point in time. I would say we're hearing from staff tonight about the longevity that they feel the $260,000 will put into it. I'm not an engineer. I depend on staff to give us that outline, and Mr. Martins is here this evening to provide us with that information. Mr. Martins.
So the work on our list, we've factored in remediation of hazardous materials in the cost.
And so that's included in the 260,000. So there's no way that you guys are going to come forward with an ask for more money once you get in there.
Not to complete what was on the list, which was narrowed down from the original work plan through our asset maintenance or asset management software.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I'm still struggling with this.
Thank you. Councillor Kroos.
Well, thank you, Worship, and I trust the plan that's been brought forward by staff. They've indicated several times that this is a needs, not wants plan. The remediation and the work is the responsibility of the city, not somebody else's, and I'm prepared to support it this evening. I think they've indicated that it's not going to be torn down in 2 or 3 years, because any plan is still going to take longer than 2 or 3 years to put in place. And a different location would still be only temporary. So I think that I hear the arguments from the rest of council, but I still believe that this is the best opportunity, and they've already got a home. They're used to being there, and I don't know of any other buildings that that they could move into offhand that would be a home for them. And as we said, it would still be a temporary location. And how long would it take to get them into there? So in the meantime, the staff and everybody who works there and that goes in as customers would have to put up with a facility that is not in good shape. And so I think it's the time is now, and I'm prepared to support it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Everett, followed by Councillor Frizzell.
Well, thank you. Appreciate Councillor Kroos's comments. We've heard clearly what the objective here is. If we wanted to look at the Bank of Montreal facility, we're talking about $4 million. So if we're struggling with 260, we're certainly going to struggle a lot more with $4 million to talk about. And we'd be running around the country trying to get federal and provincial money to get to that game that we're talking about over at the Bank of Montreal. The time is now to look at it and make sure that we get the time that's necessary to put a proper plan together, rather than just booting it down the road and saying to folks that are in the building, it's time for you to move out because the building isn't any good anymore. We can't do that. That isn't what this council is all about.
Thank you. Councillor Frizzell.
I move approval.
Seconder, Councillor Skaken. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Frizzell?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
If we delay it, then we're just about to take our summer break, and that means when we come back, it would be further delayed. I don't think this would get done with any time left in the building envelope for this year. We've got the money in place, and thank you to the federal government and to UBCM and FCM for lobbying the federal government to get this in place. It won't have an impact on taxes here, and the occupants say it needs to be done. On top of that, we know that we talked earlier tonight about the rising costs of not just construction, but of purchasing spaces. Went up $50,000 for the average residential space between 2020 and 2021. So the longer we delay, the worse this is going to get. It's time. Let's get this done.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sampson, followed by Councillor Skaken.
Thanks, Your Worship. Couple of things. I don't think a 2-week break between council meetings instead of a 1-week break between council meetings is any reason to jump into any conclusion. I think we should not be jumping to conclusions at any time. When it comes to I trust Mr. Martins. He's the expert wholeheartedly. If he says we're going to get 5 to 10 years, I believe him. My concern isn't that the building's not going to last 5 to 10 years. My concern is that the Arts Council is not going to want to be there for 5 to 10 years. The Civic Corps, and I don't know that. I'm not speaking for Ellie or his team, but realistically, the place that they're in is not a good building. I was in there recently for an arts display, and it's in really rough shape. It's a hole, and they shouldn't expect to be there for 10 more years. That's wrong. So we need to start thinking, how are we going to get them out of there quicker? The Civic Corps plan that we're doing in the fall is going to identify that that what they need, what that facility is going to look like. And if it takes us another 5 to 10 years to figure that how we're going to get them there after that, then we're not doing our job. So I think we need to be realistic in thinking that it is 3-4 years away at the high end, I think, before they're in a new facility. It's not because the facility won't last that long. It's because how long can we expect this organization to operate in something that's derelict? That's not fair. Again, I'm not prepared to support this today, based on I want to see more options. It's not $4 million to go into the BMO building. It's $4 million to turn the BMO building into a fantastic arts facility that ticks all the boxes and makes it into a black box theater space and everything else. I remember that plan. It's not $4 million to get them in there. What is the bare bones cost to get them in there and make it operational for what they need in the interim? And so we're not blowing $260 on a building we're about to tear down in a few years. We're putting $260 into something that is going to be an asset for the community for a longer amount of time, whether it's for the Community Arts Council or once they move into a new facility, it's for something else that we're going to deem goes into that building. But it needs to be a good investment, not a reactionary, impulsive investment. And so if we take an extra 2 weeks, come back at the next council meeting, and we get that information, we can make a more sound decision. So I move to postpone the vote and get back information on what it looks like, and consult with the Community Arts Council, because I want to hear their input on whether or not that's even a consideration of theirs on moving them to the BMO building as their interim facility until after the Civic Core Plan identifies the facility that they need. You can move to postpone. Can you not?
Seconder on that, Ms. Connolly. Yeah, I got it. Which motion can I deal with first?
So, Your Worship, a motion to postpone will require a meeting date that the item would come back to Council. So if Council could specify that.
At the next meeting, the 15th of August.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to deal with that recommendation right now, and I'll speak to it. I won't support it. This organization is looking for continued operation. This organization is looking for, I think, an opportunity just to maintain their business and their location. They've come to us tonight with $260,000 ask to keep them in that building. We're not talking about leveling it in 5 years or 4 years or 3 years or 10 years. We're talking about giving them an opportunity for continued operation. So I don't want to postpone this anymore from my perspective. And I'll speak to the other motion if this one fails. All those in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Postponement. Those opposed? Motion is defeated. Thank you. Councillor Skaken.
Well, thank you, Worship. I trust staff. You know, we talk about, we had a good debate here a while ago about fixing up the Playhouse to keep it operational, so the groups that use it had a place they can call home until if and when, I guess, we decide to work with them and they move. But the Community Arts Council, that Studio 2880 needs a bit of work, but it's not a hole. It's a nice building inside. It's got some character. I think that Community Arts Council and Studio 2880 will stay there for a few years. But it's a bit of a red herring just to say we're going to toss the money away, Your Worship, because we're not going to. This is the federal government money that won't always be on the table. We don't know what's going to happen down the road, so I definitely support keeping them in that place, working with that organization to perhaps find a new home down the road, but putting it off doesn't make any sense. Thanks.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Your Worship. And listening to the entire conversation here this evening, I have a better sense of this. I believe that spending this money to fix this building is a reasonable way to go forward. I still want to get a better plan for the building and for the other project, and I really hope that that is in the works. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beasley.
Your Worship, for what it's worth, I'm not sure if this is helpful comments or not, but we have been in deep conversations with Eli and the Community Arts Council and his board of directors frequently leading up to this report. We've talked about things like what happens if the building fails this winter? What happens if we don't get the funding we need and the rainwater comes in the roof and it starts to cave in. We've talked about temporary measures. We've talked about the fact that if necessary, we would do everything we could, including using the BMO building to house them. Their preference, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, if council wants in the future to hear from them, they can speak for themselves, but they've very clearly said that it would be kind of devastating for them to move into other facilities, especially not knowing what the future is. So their preference is to limp this one out as long as we possibly can for the next few years. They are very excited about being fully involved in the Civic Core planning process. They understand the timelines behind that. We've been very transparent about that, and they've assured us that from their point of view, this is the best option at this time. Again, I'm not trying to speak on their behalf, but I just wanted to assure Council we have had repeated conversations with them about this very topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Sampson. Oops, sorry.
No worries. Thanks, Your Worship, and thanks, Mr. Beasley, very much for that. I would like to hear more and maybe have an opportunity. Maybe I'll set something up with Ellie and his team for some more dialogue on this. I think if I'm going to, in my mind, if I'm going to support this $260,000, then we need to be considering the investment into this facility as we go through the Civic Core plan and then create a timeline for acting out the recommendations of the Civic Core plan and consider the investment, and note that if this is to buy 5 to 10 more years, then there needs to be a reasonable rollout of the recommendations on where the new facility is from the Civic Core plan. It needs to consider that, is what I'm saying. If the Civic Core plan says they need a new building, it can't be the first one on the list saying it's going to be done in 2 years, because we just invested money to try to make it last 5 years. We need to get at least that investment out of it, and so that's what I'm mindful of. So I'll support it with the contingent of that we are tracking this through the Civic Core plan and how it impacts the recommendations and the timelines coming out of that plan. But hearing that the Arts Council wants to stay in that facility and they're not interested in a move, then I'll support it. But that I'll be considering that as we make further decisions. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we go to the vote, I just want to make a couple comments. Staff don't deliver these recommendations to us haphazardly. You hear from Mr. Beasley this morning or this evening about ongoing conversations with Studio 2880. We hear from Mr. Martins, who views this from a professional perspective as to what that particular location needs. That's important for us to give deliberation when we're trying to come up with a decision on that recommendation. And I appreciate what staff does. When we take a look at the Civic Core plan and what that may bring back to us, and the opportunity, the unbelievable opportunity we have to do something really significant with that Civic Core plan, only the imagination can determine what the outcome might be, because that's going to be exciting work. I want to remind everybody around the table about the asset management plan that we received and have received updates over the last couple of years or 3 years. That's a driving force for our staff. That asset management plan talks about the current situation, the current condition of many of our facilities, and staff, thanks very much for the work that you do on that asset management plan, because that's a real guide. So I'll leave it at that. I will support this evening. The motion's on the floor, have been moved and seconded. All those in favor in the room? Those opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you.